ladies. Welcome back to Sister Stories. It is so good to see you again. And I know I've said this before, but just know I am so grateful for you guys and how you continue to support me in my small way of spreading the good news of Jesus Christ and encouraging women in our golden season that we can live out Psalm 92:13, which promises us that we can bring forth fruit in the golden season of our lives. Okay, so let me get started. By a show of hands, how many of you know the 411 on Hagar, Sarai's Egyptian maidservant? Okay, that's cool. But for those of you who do not, she's actually here to tell you her story. But before I bring her out, let me put some things into their historical context, or what was happening up until that point, the point of her entry. So, Hagar was first mentioned in Genesis 16, but prior to that, God had made a covenant with Abram in chapter 12, directing him to leave his homeland and go to Canaan, and he promised that he would make Abram a great nation. And then in chapter 15, God reiterated that promise, saying that Abram's descendants would be as numerous as the stars. But in the meantime, Sarai had proven to be barren. Now, this may not seem like such a big deal to us, but in the ancient world where all this takes place, it was a catastrophe, because one of the primary roles of a family was to produce the next generation. The very survival of the family line was of the highest value, and it depended on producing progeny. Okay, so skipping forward a few years, Abram and Sarai think they have a problem. It's been about 10 years since God made his promise, but Sarai still was barren. She still didn't have any children, and this was a source of distress, even shame, especially for Sarai because she was the woman. So during this time, Abram approached God about the possibility of adopting his servant Eliezer of Damascus as his heir. And God says, "No, you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Now, this reaffirms the promise of descendants and the continuation of the covenant through Abraham's own lineage. One would think that that would be enough proof, but no. At this point, Sarah has taken leave of her spiritual senses and has concocted a scheme to fix what she thinks is broken. So this is where Hagar is introduced to us. Sarah says, "Hey husband, go lay with my slaves so my shame will be relieved and we can continue the family line." Just as adoption was a common practice in barren situations, so too was surrogacy. But just because something is legal or appears to be successful doesn't mean it's got God's stamp of approval. But Abraham agrees, and by agreeing, he made the same mistake that Adam made. He followed his wife's advice and disregarded what the Lord said. What he should have done was to take his plan to God to get his approval, like he did with the adoption idea. But by failing to do that, he failed to play the protective role that God intended for husbands. Please know, when the responsibility instituted in the beginning by the Lord for the couple is not respected, the house is in danger of falling into disarray. And as my friend Judy always says, I'm just saying. Anyway, it's time to introduce the star of this story, Hagar, Sarai's Egyptian servant.
My dear Golden Season sisters, I'm Hagar, and my story has ancient roots and stands the test of time. It's a story of servitude, of longing, of a love both given and denied, and ultimately of a profound encounter with God Himself. It's a story filled with human emotions like jealousy, pride, and resentment. But please understand, I do not come to you from a place of bitterness although I am no stranger to it and knew it quite intimately. But I come to you from a heart overflowing with lessons learned in the crucible of experience. I write to you hoping that my story, though rooted in the ancient world, can illuminate the paths of your own lives. I was a handmaiden, an Egyptian woman in the household of Sarai. My life with her was defined by service, my days measured by the tasks I performed. I knew my place, or so I thought. I was a tool, a means to an end, existing in the shadows of those who held power over me, especially Sarai. Yet, within my flickered a spark of hope, a yearning for something more, a desire to be seen, to be valued, not just for what I could do, but for who I was. Sarai, my mistress, was a woman of beauty. She was a woman of grace, yet her heart carried a deep sorrow. She was barren, unable to bear a child for her husband Abram. In her desperation, and with Abram's consent, she offered me to him, hoping that through me she could fulfill her longing for motherhood. I, a woman with no choice and no voice in the matter, became a vessel, a surrogate. I conceived a child with Abram, and in that moment that I realized I was pregnant, everything shifted. The life that blossomed within me brought with it a strange mix of joy and fear, and to my discredit, arrogance. And this created a wedge between Sarai and I. I was carrying Abram's heir, a promise of posterity. You see, my initial humility turned into contempt for Sarah, a feeling I regret to this day. And the joy I felt at the miracle of new life was overshadowed by my awful, prideful attitude toward my mistress, which caused her to have an ever-growing resentment toward me. It was bad enough that she was barren, but then for me to rub it in her face that I was not was despicable. Please know, a woman's value goes way beyond her ability to conceive. This stinking thinking of mine ultimately led to her mistreating me, and although some of you would say I probably deserved it, I just could not take it anymore, so I ran away. Let me park this story here for a moment and drop this nugget on you. Listen up, lean in, listen good. Pride can be a stumbling block, and humility is a virtue to be cultivated. Think on that a moment. The initial kindness Sarai had shown me curdled like sour milk into bitterness. The power dynamic that had once been so clear became muddled, and in that murkiness, cruelty festered. As I said earlier, Sarai's resentment manifested in harsh treatment, in accusations, and in a growing sense of isolation for me. The dynamic of our relationship changed irrevocably. I, the servant, had become more than she, in a way that mattered most in their culture. I was no longer just a servant. I was a threat, a reminder of Sarai's own perceived inadequacy. The weight of Sarai's anger, the fear of my unborn child, and my lack of resilience at that time drove me into the desolate wilderness. Alone, pregnant, and terrified, I wandered, unsure of where to go or what to do. The desert mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. I was cast out, unwanted, and utterly alone. But it was in that very desolation, in the heart of the wilderness, that I encountered El Roi, the God who sees. An angel of the Lord appeared to me, a messenger of hope in the face of despair. He spoke to me, not with condemnation, but with compassion. He saw my pain, my fear, my loneliness. He knew my story, and he offered me a promise. He promised that my son, Ishmael, would be the father of a great nation, that his descendants would be too numerous to count. In that moment, everything changed. I realized that I was not forgotten. I was seen, I was known, and I was loved by a God far greater than any earthly master. I named him El Roi, the God who sees me. For in my deepest despair, he had seen me and offered me hope. Obedient to his directive, I returned to Sarai and Abram, humbled and changed. I still lived a life of servitude, but the encounter with El Roi had transformed my perspective. I knew my worth, not in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God. I knew that my son was destined for greatness and that his life had purpose. As Ishmael grew, the tension between Sarai and me, though perhaps muted, never truly disappeared. But Sarah finally conceived and bore a son, Isaac. The fragile peace that had existed was now shattered. Sarah, now a mother herself, demanded that I and Ishmael be cast out. Again, I found myself in the wilderness, this time with my son. The first time in the wilderness was by choice, my choice. This time, I had absolutely no say in the matter. It was profound. It felt like rejection, a final severing of ties. But even in that moment of despair, I clung to the promise of El Roi. I knew that he would not abandon us, and he didn't. He provided for us, guiding us, protecting us. Ishmael grew into a mighty warrior, a leader of his people, just as the angel had foretold. So as you can see, life for me ain't been no crystal stair, by no stretch of the imagination. It was filled with hardship, filled with pain, and with rejection, levels to which I can't even describe to you. But it was also filled with grace, with hope, and with the unwavering love of God who sees. And sisters, it is from the depths of this experience that I share these lessons across the vast gulf of time with you women here today. Number one, you are seen. This is the most important lesson I learned. No matter your circumstances, your background, your struggles, your economic status, race, color, or creed, you are seen by a God who loves you unconditionally. 2, you're not forgotten. Your pain matters. Your dreams matter. Everything about you matters. You matter. 3, your worth is inherent. It is not dependent upon your beauty, your accomplishments, or your social standing. Your worth is intrinsic, woven into the very fabric of your being. You are valuable simply because you are. Do not let the world tell you otherwise. 4, find strength in vulnerability. Do not be afraid to be vulnerable, to acknowledge your pain, to seek help. True strength lies not in pretending to be invincible, but in embracing your humanity, your imperfections, and your capacity for both joy and sorrow. 5. Embrace your story. Your story is unique. It is a tapestry woven from your experiences, your triumphs, and your failures. Do not compare your story to others. Do not try to fit into a mold that was not created for you. Embrace your own narrative with all its complexities and contradictions. It is your story, and it is worthy of being told. You have a story that only you can tell. 6. Forgive, not for them, but for yourself. Holding on to anger and resentment will only poison your own heart. Forgiveness is not about condoning the actions of those who have wronged you. It is about freeing yourself from the burden of bitterness. It is about choosing peace over pain. My journey was long and arduous, but it taught me the true meaning of resilience, the power of faith, and the unwavering love of El Roi, the God who sees. I pray that my story will serve as a beacon of hope for you, my sisters. May you find your own strength, embrace your own story, and know without a doubt that you are seen, you are loved, and you are worthy. With much love and blessings, hugs and kisses, your sister, the Egyptian bondservant, Hagar. Thank you.